Cohen. I'm interviewing Gerald Bubis, G-E-R-A-L-D. Jerry?
B-U-B-I-S.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
That'd be hard.
B-U-B-I-S, that's right. You do have a last name.
Right.
Jerry, have you been interviewed this way for this kind of history?
No.
No. Okay, so this is the first.
That's true.
What led you into the profession of social work, Jerry? How did you decide that that's what you wanted to do?
Excuse me. From age 11 on, I was in a Jewish settlement house as a club member and got involved in activities and went on to be a club leader and then AZA and then a chapter advisor and then a part-time staff person and then a part-time Hillel staff person and then later a full-time Hillel staff person in graduate school. And it had to do with just the comfort and excitement of working with people. So that's what did it a long time ago.
Sounds very much like my experience, Jerry. Okay. Tell me what positions you've held in the field during your career.
My first full-time position was at Hillel at the University of Minnesota as the assistant director. And then following graduate school, University of Minnesota, this is post-war, I graduated June 50. I worked as the assistant director of the Jewish Community Center of Minneapolis and the camp director for the community in Minneapolis until 53. Then, getting it all out, I went west to become the assistant director of the Oakland Jewish Center till 60. From there to Long Beach, where I was the center director from 60 to 67. And the last year I was the federation director also. And then a short stint with Jewish centers in LA, which I can explicate if you want. And from then on over to academia, starting in July of 68, where I stayed until 89, May, when I retired. And here it is, January 1994, and isn't it great that we're having so much fun?
Okay, which did you find most gratifying personally? Which of your positions? Is that a question to answer?
Yeah, no, I think there's two ways of answering. One is retrospectively, and one is at the moment.
Yeah.
And if I look back on the personal side, the greatest and most gratifying position was as a camp director. Ironically, that's the one we look back at with most pleasure and memory. We being my wife and I. I think each position had its rewards and its excitement and its stimulation, but from the point of view of answering it in maybe a little more conceptual way, the role at the college in starting a graduate school and the edifying and ramifying impact of having touched and been involved in a little or greater way with over 400 people, most of whom are still in the field, I think has given me professionally the greatest lasting satisfaction for what I would take to be the impact and the import of what all that has come to mean.
I happen to know from my personal relationship with you, Jerry, the kind of impact that you've made on a hell of a lot of people.
So, when that happens, you're a lucky person. You know
right. Right. Well, what kind of obstacles did you encounter during your career? Obstacles to doing the kind of thing that you felt you were trying to do?
Well, again, maybe I have to divide my career into the 18 years in the field as against the 21 years in academia. I think in the field, because after my stint in an interracial setting, I decided that I would cast my lot, as it were, with the Jewish community. I had an ongoing debate, discussion, and at times dispute with what at that time tended to be the conventional philosophic wisdom of the field, namely to help Jews become more American and to concentrate on the human and the humanizing aspects of whatever the service was that was being delivered, whether it was group work or casework or whatever. And early on, I felt very strongly that this was because of the influence of a rabbi I worked for at Hillel, I think, more than anything else, who just died.
Who was that?
Norman Frimmer. That a healthy American who came out of a Jewish background would be healthier as a human if he or she acknowledged Jewish roots as well as American possibilities for the use of those roots in specifically Jewish ways and in universal or communal ways that brought the requirement of a Jew to always be a good citizen and at the same time not give up past and memory as the requirement for that citizenship. And that involved a lot of battles, ideological battles and arguments having to do with what the purposes of centers were and so forth. Then there was another interesting ongoing dimension that I found interesting, which was, and some of this resonates today, the synagogue as a system feeling that if the center became more Jewish, it was somehow encroaching upon the territory of the synagogue, and at the same time the rabbis would often attack the centers for not being Jewish enough. So they were presented, centers and center people were presented with the dilemma of, if you do, you're damned, and if you don't, you're damned. And that was always interesting. And indeed, I think one of the earliest articles I ever wrote was a debate with Gerald Bubis, now pretty prominent rabbi, on center and synagogue relations and contentions and the like. Again, I'm going back over 40 years.
Did he feel that you were encroaching on his territory?
Right. Now, he doesn't feel that way anymore. No. That's okay. So that's the first phase. Then I think there was a second phase where I came to feel that the agencies that I was involved in, and increasingly I was able to get involved on a national level as a person in what was at the time the American Association of Group Work, and then later NASW, and I got involved in the Association of Senior Centers because I had always done a lot of work with seniors, and involvements in what was then called the National Conference of Jewish Communal Service. I thought there was too much of a narrowness. People were too localized, too narrowly focused on the self or the immediate community, and I got more and more drawn to the international arena, even when I was still in the field. This is before I got involved in academia. So those were some of the issues there that I related myself to, all in the context, I hope, of concern for the betterment of the society and dealing with issues and relating in inter-religious, inter-community ways. I was quite active as a professional in the United Way and the like. The academic is a different issue because there I had the excitement of founding something, starting something. That's a story in and of itself. Because it was totally accidental, was never anything I aspired to do or to be. And it turned on meeting Fred Gottschalk, who later went on to become the president of the college, meeting him in an artist's home in Jerusalem, and later being offered the opportunity to start the school. And there the challenges, let's say, were on an interior level and an external level. I'll explain what I mean by that. The faculty of HUC, for the most part, being rabbis, especially my colleagues in Cincinnati, were against the establishment of a school of Jewish Communal Service. They didn't feel it fit into the mission of the college, but for very selfish reasons. they felt it was going to diminish their pay. And they didn't know their college history very well either, incidentally, because it so happens that in 1913 the college had sponsored a program of Jewish Communal Service, which failed. And then in 1940 they nearly took over another program, the Graduate School of Jewish Social Work, which has its own story. I don't know if you want it on this tape or not. Where there was a request by the then director, Maurice J. Karpf, to have the school absorbed by HUC when his patron, Felix Warburg, died. And the day that the papers were to be signed with the college, he, Karpf, who by that time was quite wealthy, by virtue of Warburg's having invested money on his behalf, asked the then president of the college, Julius Morgenstern, what Karpf's retirement package would be. And with that, Morgenstern tore up the papers. The merger never took place. And the school closed. Karpf came to LA and became the Federation director.
Yes.
But the point was that in the early days of the School of Communal Service, I had this inner battle with colleagues and lay people who felt the Hebrew Union College as a seminary should not be sponsoring a School of Jewish Communal Service. That was one arena that was kind of interesting. The second had to do with my vision for the school, which premised the notion that there were many potential partners for that school. The School of Social Work, later I had the notion of the School of Gerontology, the School of Education, the School of Public Administration. But our initial outreach was for a double master's degree, Masters of Jewish Communal Service and Masters of Social Work degree with the University of Southern California. And there, the interesting issue was that the primary contacts and the people with the power to decide what would happen were Jews whose Jewishness did not always sit exactly comfortably. Let's put it that way. They tended to be more universalized and more assimilated Jews. There was a great deal of resistance to the notion of a double degree program with HUC. You want an anecdote?
Sure.
The real key person in all this that made it happen was John, I've lost his last name, wasn't Jewish. He was Maury Hamovich's acting dean when Maury was on sabbatical.
Yes,
right?
I know him very
Okay,
well.
all right, we both have lost his last name. Okay, he was wonderful.
Yes.
And it was while the dean was on sabbatical that this actually got effectuated in principle, then to be actuated in real life. It's important to note that HUC had a protocol with USC whereby HUC was designated the Judaic Studies Department for the University of Southern California, and under that empowered to develop any specific conjoint degree programs with any department or school within the university as seen fit by the players. So when it came time to bring this to life...
Excuse me for 1 minute. Milner.
John Milner, right.
Okay.
He was our hero. Samson Levy was the head of our graduate school at that time. Maury Hamovich was the dean at that time of the School of Social Work, and myself met to talk about a joint degree program. Maury started the meeting by turning more to Samson as the senior faculty man rather than to myself, and said, Professor Levy, could you maybe tell me a little bit about your faculty and the like? And Sam proceeded to go over the academic backgrounds of those of the HUC faculty who would be teaching in the communal service program over and above the kinds of social work and communal practitioners that I would be bringing in to flesh out the Judaic faculty. And it wasn't too shabby a list of people. And Maury received the information and then went to close the meeting. And Sam said to Maury, excuse me, I wonder if you would recognize the fact that Hebrew Union College is older than the University of Southern California, and we don't enter into these partnerships lightly. I wonder if you'd care to review with me the background of your faculty before we finalize this, so that we can be satisfied that our standards will not be assaulted.
Great. That's a great story.
Isn't that a great story? Then the second story that relates to what I'm trying to get at, having to do with the challenges and the issues. In our first class of the double master's degree students, there was among them a young Orthodox Jew, Gerson Silver, I'm sure you remember, whose father was a very famous Orthodox rabbi. Now, here was Gerson, to my knowledge, the first Jew who ever came to Southern California, USC, wearing a head covering, a kippah, wearing tzitzit, the fringes coming out of his clothes, and here he was going to be admitted into the double degree program. And the question raised by the faculty at USC, faculty rep at this time, was how would he adjust to being in a school of social work, being as he would be the only Orthodox Jew. And my comment to the faculty rep was that it would seem to me that he was quite clear on who he was, and the problem would lie in the assimilated Jewish faculty and their inability and unreadiness to adjust to the presence of a person who reminded them at every moment of his presence of who he was. And indeed, that's exactly what happened. Some of the faculty freaked out. But more interesting in another level, as I think about it, was there was another tension with the school. At the time, the School of Social Work was very heavily psychoanalytically oriented. You're a graduate, and you've gone through this. And the whole approach of their methods courses premised the notion of interaction on one-to-one basis. So I will now, for the archives, confess to something. Gerson's first-year placement was in a community center, which is typical in most schools of social work. There's an option that's considered acceptable, because it is rumored that people do grow in groups and are able to develop as human beings through the group process. And lo and behold, his teacher would not accept his process records because they were not related to one-to-one relationships, but were rather focusing on the person growing through and within the group. I had gone to a graduate school which was quite eclectic, and I studied with one of the great group work professors in the country, and to me this was not only an anomaly, but it did a disservice to what social work and social group work was all about. So, I'm now confessing, I urged Gerson, who was very, very bright, to spend the year writing fake records with imaginary cases of things that never happened, which he did very successfully, and drew an A in the
This
court.
is on tape, you know.
I know it's on tape. The statute of limitations is over. And to me it bespoke the rigidity of a set of premises that were just that. This isn't rocket science when we talk about human growth and behavior. And it bespoke what at that time I found to be the case at SC, which subsequently changed, which was a grudging acceptance of the notion of the double degree and a grudging acceptance of the level and capacity of the students given the setting that they would work in when they weren't going to be in a casework setting. Over the years that changed, and over the years I think HUC increasingly appreciated what SC had to offer, and SC appreciated, I think, increasingly what HUC had to offer, and more than that, what the caliber of the students came to be perceived as being. The third level, which is a field issue and remains one to this day, does have to do with the ambivalence that both lay and professionals in Jewish Communal Service have, whether they're social workers or otherwise, as to the importance of weaving value-laden information or material and historic memory and possibility into practice. That is to say, specifically, does a social worker have a right to ever confront a client with the possibilities of more fulfilled Jewish life and lifestyle? Does the community, as that worker is representing, have a call upon a client that goes beyond the client's pain or initial reason for approaching the agency? And to this day, that debate continues. I have been on
With
this.
some agencies being on the other side.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Not.
absolutely, absolutely. There's a very strong split, certainly in the casework agencies to this
Right.
day, that you have this notion of self-determination, somehow presuming that if another person raises a possibility for optional behaviors, that this will somehow force the client to decide something against his or her will, something I've still don't understand. But that's a field issue. It remains a field issue. It will probably be a field issue into end of days. And it's not a new issue in Jewish settings. It's not a new issue in social work. Ironically, for me, when one speaks with psychiatrists and psychoanalysts, the impression I have, however ill-founded this is that social workers, more often than not, tended to be taped in time and fixed in place, whereas those very premises they draw upon, or the academic conceptual arena, namely psychoanalytic and psychiatric methods, have moved to the point that psychiatrists don't have a problem with confronting a patient or a client with reality, including the reality of group and culture and family, as that which is as important a part of the self as the self itself is. Not a good sentence, but I hope it's clear. So that's maybe a long-winded answer to your...
Let me ask you a question along the lines that you were discussing, Jerry. I've had a sense that schools of social work generally, are doing less and less work in the group work area than they had been. When I went to school, the group work department was one of the outstanding departments in the school where I started at University of Pittsburgh.
Gertrude Wilson, the mother,
right,
the grandmother of them all.
And
I have a story about her, but go ahead.
Okay, but is that your sense
Absolutely.
also?
Yes. They group work, as we understand that term in social work parlance, and even to some degree, community organization. You went. Newstetter was there in your day.
Right.
Wilbur the Walrus, Newstetter, and Gertrude Wilson. These two giants and these two methods. Somewhere, I think something's happened that, again, subjectively speaking, I think is a disturbing development, namely that the word social has been made secondary in that the greatest bulk of students in schools of social work today are interested in private practice, and it's a relatively cheap degree, and it's a relatively quick entree in societally acceptable terms to that degree. And in the process, it has minimized those other methods, which by their nature are geared to society, people in society and groups, which has the social aspect in the conceptual sense of what that word means, not social pleasure, but societal elements. I think you're absolutely right. And you got time for the quick anecdote?
Sure.
My professor was Giza-Panofka, Minnesota, was studied with Gertrude Wilson at Pittsburgh. A lot of Pittsburgh people were in the Twin Cities when I went to school, who were Gertrude's kids, as it were. Gertrude did a land-breaking, landmark study of Educational Alliance on professional practice back in 1950 or so, which had to do with how many groups would a group worker staff. In those days, there was every attempt to have a master's in social work and group work actually working with a club, and then if the staff wasn't working directly, how many people would that person supervised. So it was really a push for professionalizing professional standards in the settlement house and the community center movement. And I was at a national conference where I met her for the first time. And she asked me who I was, and I told her. And then she asked me where I studied, and I told her. And here I had studied with her protege. Gertrude Wilson was a very big, bosomed woman.
Yes.
So when she heard this, she stroked her bosom with pride. And she said, "You're one of my grandchildren." And that was my introduction to Gertrude, with whom I became very close when she moved to Berkeley. When I was in the Bay Area. I don't know if anecdotes fit in here, but you're there.
What social movements or activities were you involved with that seemed important but didn't lead to the goals that you wanted to attain?
Well, after the war, I was very involved politically in the Wallace Campaign, Henry Wallace's campaign, which history tells us was unsuccessful, his campaign for presidency. I was involved in something called the American Veterans Committee, which you might recall was an attempt among the veterans to break the back of the conservative American legionnaires and veterans of foreign wars and move away from the notion of veterans having a call on the government for benefits and rather have the society have a call on the veterans for service. And the whole premise behind the American Veterans Committee was to change into a service-oriented entity. Its back was broken by the communists of those days, so that it died an early but glorious death. But it was a very visionary thing. I was active in World Federalists. All of the right causes, maybe at the wrong times. But I never lost my optimism. I went on to become very active in activities for seniors, as I had mentioned in passing, and that was much more successful because it was, I guess, maybe more conventional and more acceptable. And then in later years, the last 15 years, quite involved in the peace movement for Israel, in which I'm still engaged, and various elements and dimensions of it. And there I think we've been very successful because the government we wanted to come in is in, and right as we talk, January '94, we're in the middle of what I hope will be a successful peace process, as painful, as difficult as it might prove to be. So those have been, I guess, the highlight organizations that I engaged in, aside from professional ones.
Well, I'd just like to say for the record that I've always felt that you were an extremely courageous guy with a strong stand that you took in the areas that you believed in. And I'm so happy to know that you feel that things are moving that well in Israel toward what your goals have been, that I have always felt the goals ought to be.
I think there's a lesson there. I don't remember that there's a question there, but there's a lesson for practice, which is that you mustn't give up. If you have a vision that your belly and your head tells you is right, you have an option, which is to try it, and when it doesn't get ratified by the world around you, you give up on it in either despair or cynicism or whatever, defeat. And I think the lessons that I've learned are that a lot of issues related to social movement and social change are issues related to timing and readiness. And if you see yourself as a change agent, you have to understand your role in trying to prepare the readiness. It's like making way for that which is yet to be, which you may never see. But if you're tenacious about it, then you continue. And there I owe a lot to Giza Konopka, who now is well in her 80s and is still working on adolescents in prisons and the like, and she's never lost her optimism, a woman who came out of Germany. And it taught me a lot about tenacity and self-affirmation that you sometimes cannot be confirmed by a group or an organization or a society at a given moment. It's either too unpopular, people aren't ready, then you have to have a certitude about yourself.
Great. Okay. What's your view about measures that the social work professional can undertake to affect programs or policies?
Well, I must say, I'm now a card-carrying member, which I've always been, of NASW and its predecessor organizations. I've been a member since 1948. I do not resonate to...
You were saying.
I don't resonate to the agenda of NASW, not because of any strong disagreement about it, but rather that, I guess because of society and the field being as complex as they both are, there's much more a sense of segmentation than there is unifying of purpose. And I think that's understandable. NASW is very large now. I think it gets involved, understandably, again, in a lot of institutional maintenance. But the end result is that the camaraderie of past is gone. The interdisciplinary or intersetting or intermethodological groupings are gone with the disappearance of the group work. Within NASW, there is this association for the study of groups, but it doesn't have the same kind of forcefulness. So it's an organization that I suppose has grown to be larger than any of us ever thought it would be, but it's really not clear to me what kind of impact it has. And in all fairness, because I'm not active in it, I really have no right to judge it as compared to what I felt about it in the days when I was active. My sense there is that an organization tends to reflect a society, and this is a segmented society. So when you get the minority groups, so-called, and that never includes the Jew anymore by definition of the other minority groups, and you get the demands, all understandable, of the gays and the lesbians. It's a fractionated world with no vision of oneness or wholeness or completion that I would wish were there also. And then the other has to do with the fact that as more and more of these people have been in private practice, the agenda of concern has to do with the issues that protect them in insurance cases and malpractice issues and the issues of certification and licensure, which bottom line are much more gatekeeping to keep people out in many instances, and or to assure that insurance co-payments take place and the like. And again, that social vision of the early giants is not there. I think the journal is a good journal, but again, as it's become more and more research oriented, it lacks the philosophic premises, which seems to me should underpin the reason people go into that field in the first place, which is the betterment of the human condition through the modification of the social system. And
unfortunate.
Yeah, but I think that's true, and the take on it then means much more narrowly gauged research, much more narrowly gauged reportage and evaluation, and less and less of the visionary stuff that attracted me to call myself, try to prepare myself to be a social worker in the first place. And I no longer identify that strongly with social work, qua social work as a result.
Okay, I have a couple of other questions, but I think we've already covered these. But one last question. Do you have any personal papers, pamphlets, or items that can be made available?
I gave all my material to the American Jewish Archives, where there are 90 transfile boxes of everything. If anybody wants to look at my writing, how I went about building the school, the philosophical things, the work I did, the pre-thinking, any of that, it's there. Cincinnati, Ohio, 3101 Clifton Avenue. And I have nothing else. No.
Okay, I think that's too bad, but
well, it's there.
It's there for us to use if we wish. Jerry, do you have anything else that you would like to add to this little session?
No, I would say this. I have no idea if anyone will ever listen to this tape or transcribe and read it to you.
Yeah, it'll be transcribed, and you'll get a copy of it before it goes further.
My only comment would have to do with the fact that I believe professions and settings and methodologies have to remain developmental and open-ended and never become self-satisfied or smug or conclude that they have now achieved the apotheosis of their knowledge and their wisdom and the like. And here again, I'm not comfortable. This could be as much out of ignorance as anything else. I'm not comfortable with professional schools who don't have a strong overlay of the visionary and the ethical and the moral as a frame for practice, because practice to me can otherwise degenerate down into techniques, everything from how to achieve a good orgasm to run a good meeting to get people to sign a petition.
Without any long-term goals.
Yeah, and moral underpinnings. I would like to hear more from the heads of the schools of social, the deans, as to their visions for the world and their visions for their students and the world their students will work in. I was involved in a very small enterprise when all is said and done academically. But I think I understood that teaching includes touching people's hearts and spirits, souls, whatever terms you want to use, to elevate them about their own potential as human beings. And when I look back on my own education, that to me is what happened to me in graduate school from a Giza Konopka and a Ruby Purnell and a couple of other people. And the other professors that I had, I have a great deal of trouble in even bringing forth their names because they didn't touch me. They tried to teach me, but they didn't touch me. And my wish for, or my hope for a school and for a professor is to understand what the word profess means, which is to stand for something, and not assume that because you stand for it that every student will in turn stand for that which you do, but at least to then give the student some place or pole or person to contend with, and in that process evolve his or her own professing of values and goals. And if a professional school doesn't do that, to me the professional school has failed. And I think a school of social work that ends up producing the greatest number of its graduates going into private practice is a failed system, given the fact of what their historical auspices and historical mission has been. And there I despair, and it saddens me, because it isn't as if our society isn't in need of a little bit of help.
Oh boy.
So that's
Jerry, I thank you very much for taking the time to do this, and I know this will be a very important item for us.
It's all right.
Thank you.
Okay. How many of these do you do?
Oh, I've done 4 or 5.